In the late 1970s, the quiet streets of Glasgow's Cross Hill district became the unsettling stage for a series of chilling encounters. Between 1976 and 1979, local residents, all of them women, reported sightings of a strange and terrifying figure known as the Gurning Man. Described as disturbingly human-like, yet unnervingly spectral, he was said to be bald, extremely thin, and dressed in tight black clothing. His most haunting feature was his grotesque expression, a twisted grimace that blurred the line between a smile and an anguished scowl. The Gurning Man appeared unpredictably, both on the streets and even inside private homes during the eerie hours of 9 p.m. to 4 a.m. Witnesses described him as solid and lifelike, unlike traditional ghostly apparitions, and his presence often filled them with sheer, inexplicable terror. It was a still, quiet night in the late 1970s, and the dim light of the moon poured into the bedroom of a middle-aged woman in Cross Hill, Glasgow. She had been sound asleep beside her husband when a strange noise stirred her awake. At first, she dismissed it as his snoring, but the sound was different, unnatural. It was a low, guttural snorting coming from the foot of the bed. Confused and slightly unnerved, she hesitated before carefully lifting her head from the pillow. As her eyes adjusted to the moonlit room, she froze in terror. Standing at the foot of her bed was a man, thin, bald, and wearing what appeared to be a tight black outfit. He wasn't moving closer, but was performing an odd, disturbing gesture. His hands were rubbing frantically against his chest, and his face contorted into a grotesque grin that seemed to straddle the line between joy and agony. His expression was otherworldly, horrifying in a way that words could not capture. Her heart pounded as she tried to comprehend what she was seeing. The longer she looked, the more terrified she became. Unable to contain her fear, she let out a blood-curdling scream that shattered the eerie silence of the room. Her husband bolted upright in alarm, fumbling for the light switch. As the room filled with light, the figure was gone, vanished without a trace, leaving no sign he had ever been there. The woman sat trembling, clutching her blanket, her husband confused and unable to find an explanation. All that remained was the heavy, oppressive fear that lingered in the room long after the incident ended. It was a late night in the quiet streets, the full moon casting an eerie glow on the empty roads. Two teenage girls were walking home from a party, their laughter and light-hearted conversation filling the silence. As they approached a dimly lit street lamp, their footsteps slowed. Standing under the orange glow of the light was a man, a thin, bald figure clad in tight black clothing. He wasn't moving forward, but instead shifted nervously in place, his movements jittery and unnatural. The girls exchanged uneasy glances, their playful chatter abruptly ceasing. As they drew closer, they saw his face, a grotesque contortion halfway between a grin and a grimace. His mouth curled unnaturally, as though caught in some mix of joy and unbearable anguish. Then came the sounds. Low, guttural snorts and grunts that broke the stillness of the night. Overcome with a sudden wave of terror, they quickened their pace, trying to pass him without looking directly. The man didn't move, but his presence loomed, oppressive and chilling. When they were just a few steps past him, panic set in, and they broke into a run. One of the girls, her curiosity battling her fear, glanced back over her shoulder. To her horror, the man was gone. He had vanished entirely, leaving the street lamp flickering dimly over an empty road. There was nowhere he could have hidden. No doorways, no alleys, just the long, open street stretching into the darkness. Breathless and trembling, the girls ran until they reached home, haunted by the image of his twisted face and the inexplicable way he disappeared. It was late evening in Cross Hill, and the streets were silent, shrouded in a thin mist. An elderly woman, following her nightly routine, opened her front door to place the empty milk bottles on the doorstep. The cool air greeted her as she stepped outside, her gaze naturally drifting toward the empty road ahead. But it wasn't empty. Standing in the middle of the street was a man, tall, impossibly thin, and dressed in a tight black outfit. His bald head glistened faintly under the dim glow of the streetlight, and he seemed to sway slightly, as if shifting his weight from one foot to the other. The sight stopped her cold. His presence was unnerving, and though she couldn't see his face clearly, she felt an overwhelming sense of dread. She stood frozen, clutching the milk bottles in her trembling hands. Just as she gathered the courage to call out or step back inside, the man moved. Or rather, he didn't. He was there one moment, and the next, he wasn't. In the blink of an eye, the figure vanished completely, leaving the street empty and silent once more. There was no sound of footsteps, no rustling of movement, just the oppressive stillness of the night. The woman's heart pounded in her chest as she stared at the spot where he had been. It was as if he had dissolved into the mist, leaving behind nothing but a lingering sense of unease. She quickly retreated into her house, locking the door behind her and drawing the curtains, her mind racing with fear and confusion. She didn't sleep that night, haunted by the image of the strange man and his impossible disappearance. Each witness had their own story, but they all shared one haunting similarity: the presence of the Gurning Man, with his eerie appearance, bizarre actions, and his uncanny ability to vanish without a trace. No one could explain what he truly was: a waking nightmare, a disturbed individual, or a tortured spirit trapped between worlds. But the most terrifying aspect was how he crept into their minds, planting a fear so persistent that it stayed with them long after the encounters. The Gurning Man was not just a phantom wandering the streets of Cross Hill. He became a ghost etched into their memories, impossible to forget, impossible to erase. What do you think about this chilling phenomenon? Was the Gurning Man a ghostly apparition, a figment of the imagination, or something else entirely? His haunting presence and inexplicable disappearances leave us with more questions than answers. Could he be a reflection of hidden fears, a product of the mind's darkest corners, or a spirit trapped in a liminal space between worlds? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's unravel this mystery together. Your perspective might be the key to understanding this unsettling enigma.